All right. Well, thank you everybody again for joining us today. This is our session on Generation Z, a manager's survival guide. And a shout out to our Facebook Live audience. This webinar is part of a 6-part workforce-related topic series supported by Gordon Food Service. Gordon Food Service is a great partner of WRA's with valuable business solutions for you to consider. This webinar is hosted by the Wisconsin Restaurant Association, dedicated to the success of the food service and hospitality industry. WRA serves as your primary resource for regulatory guidance, training opportunities, and solutions to relevant challenges. A couple of housekeeping items before I turn things over to our speaker. Feel free to submit questions using the chat box or the Q&A feature found at the bottom of your screen. You'll also want to locate the poll feature also at the bottom of your screen. We'll use that here in a moment. The webinar is being recorded and it will be sent to you in the next day or two. And if you would please answer the quick feedback questions after the session, it would be greatly appreciated. I will now introduce our presenter who has made today's session possible. I'm super excited to have with us today, Steve Bench, founder of Generational Consulting, LLC. Steve is a nationally recognized speaker who has shared his message with audiences across the country, earning the nickname the Millennial Guy. Prior to founding Generational Consulting, Steve was program director for Business World, where he worked with thousands of teenagers every year, and those millennials have informed and inspired his presentations. So before I turn things over to Steve, I'm just going to launch a quick poll to get a pulse on which generations are joining us today. So we'll give it a moment here. Give it another few seconds. You can see the votes still coming in. Okay. So we have a nice mix and Steve is nodding his head. So I'm gonna go ahead and let Steve take it away.
All right, thank you so much, Amy, for the introduction. I'm gonna share my screen. Hopefully that goes through okay. Pull up my slides here. Okay, and before I launch in, is everything okay, Amy? Can you guys see my slides and hear me okay? Awesome, okay. Yep, great. So thank you so much for making time this morning. I know that we are all extremely busy. We have a million things that we need to do. We're dealing with all sorts of issues right now. So the fact that you made time to be here for this session, I really appreciate it. And I hope you really get a lot of value out of it. Let's get right into it. So you heard that awesome introduction. My name is Steve Bench and I created Generational Consulting. And I get the awesome job of going around the country, at least before COVID, and now it's a lot more virtual. But I help businesses understand how to attract and retain the next generation of talented employees. And I do that through the lens of generational differences, because I feel that in order to really truly understand how to attract and retain tomorrow's leaders and tomorrow's future talented employees, we need to understand how we got to where we are today, why we're so different from each generation that preceded us, not just the ways we're different. We can notice the ways we're different, but how are we different and why are we different are really, really important distinctions. Because if we can build an improved understanding of each generation, especially Gen Z, then I think we can improve the way that we manage them at work. So I'm going to give you, hopefully, an improved understanding of millennials and then especially Generation Z. And hopefully that'll improve the way we manage them at work. And I'll also leave you with some tips and suggestions on what you can do to create a work environment that's attractive to young professionals, that'll attract those Gen Z employees and keep them around, make sure they stay at least longer than they would have otherwise if we hadn't maybe thought about some of these things. So what gives me the confidence to speak about these generational differences is what I do when I'm not speaking to adults about the business world. I work with teenagers at a nonprofit that I created called The Pitch. And if you were to take Shark Tank TV show and mix it with Price is Right game show, you would have The Pitch. It's a business contest in a one-day field trip setting. The kids have an absolute blast. They're learning about business. They're learning about how to be employable, but they're also learning what the future workforce expects of them. And we might think of Gen Z as these middle school kids right here in the pictures from my programs, but they're also in high school. They're also in college. And if you don't have any Gen Zs working for you yet, you're going to very, very soon, and in a lot larger numbers as well. So we've got to figure out these issues. When I'm not teaching my Shark Tank kids about business, I'm an AAU basketball coach. So I spend way too much time in stinky, unair-conditioned gyms around the Midwest, coaching other people's kids so that they can get another trophy and another necklace for their nightstand and feel special about themselves, right? So I work with thousands of teenagers every single year. That's what I'm trying to get across here, is that these are the kids that I work with that have informed and inspired this session that you're about to hear. So before we can even begin to think about what these middle school kids are going to need to be successful in the workplace, a lot of us were just trying to wrap our minds around the millennials, right? We were just trying to figure out how millennials are so different. And I'm going to give you the proud millennial version and perspective on this presentation as a millennial who grew up here in the US, and I can share my experience and perspective. And honestly, what this is really all about is that we've never had this many generations working side by side in the workplace before. And it's creating a lot of problems because each one of these generations was raised a little bit differently. They experience life differently. And as a result of that, they become young adults who have a much different set of expectations about our work-life balance and how my lifestyle fits in with my career. And depending on the life stage that I'm at, if I'm a Gen Z, maybe I prioritize my friends and my lifestyle over what I do for work, which something like my grandparents and parents' generation just makes their head spin. But this generation is different. Gen Z truly was the first generation that was born online. As a millennial, I grew up with technology, but I didn't have it in my crib. Today's kids absolutely do. And when they want to know the answer to a question, they don't quietly raise their hand and wait to be called on. They Google it. If they want to learn how to do something, they don't ask the teacher or grandpa to show them or teach them. They go on YouTube or they go on TikTok and they can learn how to do all sorts of things. That's where they get their news. That's where they shop. If they need a room, it's Airbnb. If they need a ride, it's Uber. Everything that I need in my life goes through that phone that's in my pocket. And as a Gen Z, I've always gotten my information off of a screen this size. So if you're trying to hire me and recruit me, and then once I get there, how you give me my orientation and my training, if you need to go to a screen that's bigger than my phone, you're starting to lose me. I know we can't do everything through a phone, but the point is if you go bigger than this screen, you start to lose my attention. This is what I'm used to. This is how I get my information. So if you're not making the information that I need to learn, to be trained, to succeed and get ahead, if you're not doing it through the channels that I'm already using and the channels that I already prefer, you're starting to lose me. Because this Gen Z generation, sharing is normal to them. I have kids at my Shark Tank camp that tell me, Steve, I have friends that social media is like their entire life. And TikTok has taken over. TikTok here in 2021 just surpassed YouTube in terms of average time spent per user on the app. And they also are going to be passing Snapchat in terms of daily active users in about 2023. They just passed Instagram. So Instagram used to kind of be Gen Z's thing. Now TikTok has surpassed Instagram in terms of average daily users, and it has surpassed YouTube in the time that I spend on the app every time that I log in. Snapchat still has it beat in daily users on a day-to-day basis, but that's changing very quickly, and it's projected that by about 2023, TikTok will fully take over. And if you're an older generation on this call, you might not even have heard of TikTok or don't know what it is. You feel like this poor guy right here. I'm just trying to run my business. Now I need to worry about all these different things that this younger generation is doing. It can be really frustrating. And I need you to take a reality check, because whether you think that millennials and Gen Z are the best or the worst, or that they've got a lot to figure out, or that they're misunderstood, it really doesn't matter, because these multi-generational issues, they're not going to go away, and they're not going to get better on their own anytime soon. They're only going to intensify as we continue to have these labor shortages, and more boomers are retiring, and more Gen Zs are looking for that job that connects with their lifestyle. And if you can't show me how your job fits in with my lifestyle, you're probably going to lose me. Square one is showing me that this job can fit around your lifestyle and you can be happy here. So before we go any further, a quick roadmap for the rest of the session this morning. We're going to really briefly talk about the generations over time so that we can understand how we got to Gen Zs. We can understand how we got to those millennials. So we'll talk about the generations over time, and we'll stop around the time of the boomers and mention how that was when we started to shift the way we raise our kids. We started to parent them differently at home, teach them differently in the classroom. People like me coach them differently on the sports field. And as a result of that, it began with the millennials and it has now continued into Gen Z. We have two generations of young adults that have a very different expectation about how my job and my lifestyle fit in together. So I'm going to hopefully give you an improved understanding of Generation Z so that we can improve the way that we manage them at work. And I'm also going to give you some action steps and some ideas on how we can maybe do things a little bit differently or think about things in a different way so that we can really connect with Gen Z and bring them into this to our organization and be successful. So these are the generations coming up on the screen. You guys recognize these names. That's the year that they were born. Parentheses is how old they are today, and percentage is percent of the workforce that they make up. We already did our generational survey. Thanks to Amy for helping with that. We got a good mix on the call, a good balance. And I'll ask you kind of rhetorically, what is it that makes a generation a generation? And what is it that shaped your generation into who you are? Because if we look back to like my grandparents' generation, the veterans, and we look and think about what they all lived through, they lived through so much and so much sacrifice and so much dedication and commitment to something that was bigger than themselves. They lived through the Second World War and they lived through the Great Depression, if we look back even a little bit further. And if you were one of the kids who lived through that generation, you didn't forget any of those experiences. You didn't forget any of those things that you saw. You internalized them and they became a part of who you were as an adult. And what came out the other end for the kids of that generation, my grandparents, was they learned that an adult is someone who gets their identity through hard work. That my grandma, my grandpa, they lived to work. And my grandpa's job said everything about who he was as a man. And I think work was such an essential part of his identity because of all that childhood trauma, because he lived through so much and he saw adults in his life sacrificing and working hard and being dedicated providers. So if you asked grandpa when he was a young adult, what makes a man, or, what makes a woman, what makes an adult, and what gives them the respect of their peers, it was probably somebody that could be that reliable provider, that was loyal and accountable, that you could count on to be there for you. And work was a central part of that identity. The boomers would come on to be this next generation. And they were a completely different generation than their parents because they had so much more economic opportunity available to them. The first thing about the boomers is who was it that raised them? They were raised by the generation we just talked about that survived the war, survived the Great Depression, and passed on all of that commitment and resiliency and dedication to their boomer kids. And the boomers lived through a lot of political, cultural, and social change, civil rights, women's liberation. And if you were one of the people that was voting for those changes and picketing on those marching lines, you feel like that's an essential part of your identity. It was also the boomers who gave us this work hard, play hard American dream mentality. And my parents had a much different adulthood than I do as the millennial. So my mom and dad, the boomers, when they were coming of age and they were the young adults that were about 25 years old, adulthood looked totally different. So you probably couldn't live with your parents until you were 30 years old and be a respected boomer in the eyes of your peers. You had to move out of your parents' house, go find a job, be self-reliant, maybe find a spouse, start a family, buy a house. Those were the markers of adulthood for the baby boomers. That's what my parents were chasing. And by the time my mom and dad were 25 years old, they had already reached all these life stages. They had gotten married, they had had 3 kids, they had bought that big house and gone into a bunch of debt. This picture right here, this literally was my family when my parents were 25 years old. And as a result of that lifestyle, that's what they wanted. That's what they were chasing. They had to get much more serious about work at a much younger age to enable and provide that lifestyle that they wanted. That would change over time. And millennials, and especially Gen Z today, maybe we aren't at that same life stage. And as a result of that, maybe that means I make my decisions about work a lot differently than my parents did when they were 25. This is also the generation of boomers who shifted the way that we parent our kids. The boomers are the ones who started to say, you know what, my kid's special. And whether we're rich or not, I'm going to make sure that they have a lot of chances and opportunities and support, more than I got when I was their age. And I'm not going to let them fail. And this is a lot of this is made possible because the American family over time has been getting smaller and smaller and smaller. So a couple generations ago, if you have 5 or 6 siblings, I don't care how much of a helicopter parent you're trying to be, you can't be in 6 different places at once. But if we only have 1 or 2 kids now, they're going to get a lot more support than your parents got at that age. And as a result of that, the average kid now, Gen Z especially, they leave the household feeling really powerful, really important, and really successful because we put them in a position to succeed and to be good at different things. And we like to tell them that. We like to support them and encourage them. And we'll talk about little trophy boy here when we get to Gen Z, when we get to the millennials. But who did we just skip over? If you've been following, we covered my grandparents, the veterans, my parents, the baby boomers. The boomers were the ones who created this trophy culture. So we're talking about millennials and Gen Z a little bit now. But who did we just gloss right over? The overlooked, forgotten generation. Gen X, I know you're out there today, Gen X. Make a little bit of virtual noise for yourself. You guys gave us Nirvana, so shout out for that. You gave us The Breakfast Club, my favorite movie, so 2 for 2 on the pop culture quiz. And maybe if you're a Gen Xer, you can relate to this meme. And if you're a baby boomer, a meme is a picture with words on it. But this meme is for Gen X. You got smacked with the wooden spoon, you ate the lead paint chips, you didn't wear a car seat or a bike helmet, you rode right in the back of the pickup truck, you drank right out of the garden hose, and you survived it all, right? You lived to tell the tale. And I think that Gen X, some of the things that were different about your generation, were you were the kids who lived through the divorce rate going up. So maybe you were that first generation of American kids who had a house with mom and a place with dad, and you split time between the two, maybe making you a little bit more independent and a little bit more of an individual because you were on your own more than kids are today. On a more positive note, we see mom going into the workplace during Gen X's generation. So what that meant was maybe you were the kid who came home to an empty house after school. The adults weren't always around to supervise you 24/7. We also start to see some things happening in our country where bad news travels fast. And we start to see some horrible things like kidnappings and murders and kids going missing. And all of a sudden now, whereas parents used to just let their kids go off and play, now we're keeping a little bit closer eye on it. We don't want to let our kids out of our sight as much. And we're kind of starting to supervise them 24/7. Now that was my millennial reality. That's certainly the reality of Gen Z kids today. We usually don't let them out of our sight for very long unless we know exactly what they're doing and who they're going to be with so that we can keep them safe and protected. But as a Gen Xer, you might have seen the start of that shift, but I can pretty much guarantee you that you were not supervised 24/7. And in fact, your average summer day as a Gen X kid is probably literally being kicked out the screen door, told to go off and play, and you didn't come home until, help me out now, you didn't come home until the streetlights came on. And you were the last generation of American kids to go off and play by yourself, and you didn't come home until the streetlights came on. And that might just seem like simple nostalgia. And it is nostalgic, to be sure. But there's more to it than just nostalgia. Because think about what was happening to you as the young adult on those summer days. You were learning how to be more independent. I've had Gen Xers joke with me, there were never any adults around. We pretty much raised ourselves, right? It means you were more independent and more resilient, because when you were off playing by yourself, I'm guessing occasionally you made a bad decision or two, and you actually had to face the consequences of your actions. A pretty novel concept to the millennial or the Gen Z who's always had extra credit in school or a second chance or a well-intentioned mom or dad that's going to give me a do-over. I might not be as used to facing consequences, and as a result of that, dealing with the adversity that life throws at us as the generations who came before me. I know that my millennial friends and the Gen Z kids I coach in basketball are not as self-reliant as some of the generations that came before us, because they didn't have adults always swooping in to protect us and to fix things and to smooth everything over. You had to deal with a lot of that yourself. And as a result of that childhood experience, you became a young adult who entered the workplace a lot better equipped to deal with the different things that life and work is going to throw at us on a daily basis. And whereas you had that life experience at 25, the average Gen Z employee that walks through your door or walks into your restaurant does not. And we need to keep that in mind when we hire them and onboard them and train them and win them over to be part of our team so that they like working for us, they give us their best, and they stay here longer than they would if we didn't do some of these things. So Gen X, I think, had a very different reality. We talked about the baby boomers and how much economic opportunity was available to them. And for a boomer, if you were willing to work hard, put in your time and pay your dues, there were tons of middle-class jobs in this country. You didn't need an expensive college degree to get them, and you could be middle class. Well, we start to see that change during Gen X's generation. Some of those factories, especially here in the upper Midwest, those factory towns, those factory jobs disappeared. They went overseas, and it took that middle-class lifestyle with them. And we start to see the economy changing and the loyalty oath breaking down. Or sometimes people wonder, how come we don't have the loyalty that we used to? My grandpa worked for one employer for 50 years. He didn't job hop. He didn't play any games. And now all of a sudden we're changing all the rules to cater to this younger generation. It can be a little bit frustrating. Part of what's driving that change is a lot of people were laid off through no fault of their own. People who were like our grandparents who gave their identity to their job. And now all of a sudden you took my job away from me. Where does that leave me? So a lot of young people are starting to say, I'm not going to get my identity through work. I'm going to get my identity through my lifestyle, through what I do outside of work. My friends and family are going to like me and love me and respect me, not because of necessarily what I do, but because of who I am. And that's a lot different than the generations that preceded us. And I honestly think Gen Xers, they have the true dilemma. I think they have it the hardest of all the generations. Because when you were the young professional, when you were the new guy, the rookie, the new person in the office or in the restaurant, it was a boomer-dominated world. So if you wanted that job, you had to conform, you had to do it the way they told you to do it, you had to follow their rules, you had to play with all these unwritten rules of the workplace. Earn every inch, show up early, stay late, you have to be seen to be counted, never go above your boss's head, pay your dues, keep your head down, right? No news is good news. All these old rules. Now you did it. You put in your time. You did it their way. The boomers are finally retiring. You're finally promoted. You're finally a manager. And guess what? We're changing the rules now to cater to the millennials and to cater to the Gen Z kids and employees. And a lot of people say, well, hold on. Nobody did anything like that for me when I was the rookie. So why should I cater to this generation? And a lot of people get really frustrated because they feel like the hiring process has totally flipped. Whereas my grandpa used to feel lucky to have this job and he acted like it, never took a sick day, always showed up on time. You could count on him to be responsible. Now the hiring process has totally flipped. And I talk to people who own businesses that are having the hardest time just getting people to come through the door for a job interview and then stick around for more than a few weeks once we hire you. It can be really challenging. So what's driving this workforce reality? The demographics have a ton to do with it. The boomers are retiring, about 10,000 a day. Gen X is about 30 million people smaller than the boomers and about 35 million smaller than the millennials and Gen Z. So there's not enough of them to fill all those positions. That means we need millennials. We need Generation Z. And as a result of that, I think that the millennials were the first ones to recognize this. Gen Z has it as well. We've got leverage when it comes to what we do for work. We can choose a lot of different things to do for a career. Part of what gives us so much leverage is, again, this is the thing that the millennials started and Gen Z has absolutely picked up the reins. We have delayed the traditional life stages of adulthood. I mentioned how my parents got married, had kids, and settled down by 25. And as a result, got a lot more serious about work. But I'm the millennial, or I'm the Gen Z, and I'm 25 years old today. I'm part of the Gen Z generation. I'm probably not married. I probably don't have any kids yet. That means I'm not at home changing diapers yet. I'm still taking selfies. And if I'm taking selfies instead of changing diapers, then that means I don't need the spouse. We don't need the house. We haven't put our roots down in your community. And I can quit this job and move across the country a lot easier than any generation in American history. because I haven't reached those life stages yet. And to me, that's what defines my millennial generation. And it has continued to define Generation Z today at age 25. We have delayed those life stages. And as a result of that, we might still be prioritizing our lifestyle over what we do for work. And that's the challenge. How do we build a culture that attracts and retains Generation Z employees and millennials when it seems like those young employees are the most disengaged ones in the workplace? It can be challenging, and it's really hard because improving your culture and building a new culture takes time. It's not just flipping a light switch. But I'm Gen Z, or I'm the millennial. I'm used to flipping a light switch, pushing a button and having it happen instantly. So I'm not likely to wait around for your culture to change. I'm going to go find somewhere that's a better fit for me. And it's made even more complicated by the fact that we are now living in the smartphone age, and smartphones have taken over. And yes, they give us more information for free than any person could ever consume in one lifetime, and that's awesome. But it's also cost us something, because before smartphones came along, there used to be this old rule that at some point in the line, we would defer to an authority figure. We'd put our faith and our trust into that higher power to tell us what to do or think, and we believed in them. Now we don't believe in anything, and we question authority at every turn. Back in the day, it used to be your father knows best, never talk back to your teacher, follow your orders if you were in the military. When the news would come on at night, Republican or Democrat, we could actually watch the news together and believe that those were the facts of what happened during the day. We fight about everything now, and we challenge authority at every turn. I mean, think about when we go to the doctor now. It's like, well, geez, doc, I know that you went to med school for like 10 years and this is literally your life's work, but I don't know. I was on WebMD last night and I read an article, and now I don't think you know what you're talking about because I'm the Gen Z expert with the smartphone in my pocket. Or I'm the millennial that thinks I know more than you because I've got all this information at my disposal. And that can be challenging because smartphones have kind of convinced everybody that they're the smartest person in the room. So maybe I'm a little more skeptical about learning from somebody else, or I'm a little more skeptical that you can show me something that I didn't already know. So how can we connect with this generation? How can we motivate them? A few more thoughts here on my millennial generation, because we've started a lot of these trends that Gen Z now are fully embodying. But millennials and Gen Z, our adulthood, it's always been all about us. We have so many ways to have an identity. We can do it through sports. We can do it through social media. There are so many ways now for young people to express themselves and to have an identity. We don't have to conform. Like the Gen Xers kind of had to conform to get into that adult club because it was a boomer dominated world. So you had to do it their way. You didn't really have a choice. But Gen Z today, the millennials today, we don't have to conform. We have so many choices about what we do for work, what we do for our lifestyle, what we do to kind of be who we are. And like my grandpa was so defined by work, work no longer defines us. Our lifestyle does. And Gen Z and millennials have flipped this equation around to what you see today. Whereas my grandpa and grandma lived to work because of what they lived through, now millennials and Gen Z, I work for my lifestyle and for my family and my friends, and they come first. And if you don't show me how your job can fit around my lifestyle, you're probably not going to get me in the door, and you're probably not going to keep me for very long. And if you thought millennials were hard to work with, well, good thing you're here, because Gen Z is going to be even more disruptive to the things we think of as normal, and they're going to challenge those paradigms even more than the millennials did. They're called Generation Z. They were born after 1995, which makes most of them younger than Google. You can believe that. Kind of scary to think about. And if you want to know where millennials stop and Gen Z starts, it's usually whether or not you're old enough to remember September 11th. If you can remember 9/11, you're a millennial or older. And if you learned about it in school, you're probably a member of Generation Z. And whereas millennials like me grew up with technology, I had a cell phone and my parents paid for in high school, all that business, sure. But we weren't truly this first fully digital generation like Gen Z is today. And as a result of many things, Gen Z, whether you're rich, poor, or middle class, you leave your household feeling really powerful, really important, and really successful. I think that that's because we now have kid-centric families in this country. The average weekend for the average family in this country, it probably revolves around your kids' schedule and what activities they have going on. That's a lot different than my grandpa. My grandpa, I know I can't hear you guys now, but help me finish this. Children are to be seen and not heard. Not anymore. The kid's at the center of our family life. That gives them a tremendous sense of self-confidence. We encourage them about the things they're passionate in. We tell them that they're getting better. We give them that confidence. They're the kids at the internet age. So for as long as they can remember, they've got a smartphone in their pocket that gives them access to a world's worth of information and knowledge that we did not have when we were their age. And for as much as they need to learn about the working world, and for as naive as they might be about some of those real world experiences, if you were to do a generational survey to find which generation is most familiar with the technologies and softwares and platforms that are going to shape the future workplace and are going to shape our world in the future, it ain't the boomers, it ain't the Xers, it ain't the millennials, it's Gen Z. So they might walk in the door and be the most inexperienced person on your staff, but they might be the expert in a whole lot of different content areas that you didn't even realize. Things like how they use social media, their comfort level with installing and teaching new software programs and platforms. The person in your office or in your restaurant that might be the expert in these content areas might be some of the youngest people you got working for you, Gen Z. So it's easy to be divisive and to find differences about generations that we don't like and to talk about them and to have those grudges. But are we spending just as much time and energy trying to find ways to be a multiplier instead of a divider? Multiply my skills and my talents. Find the things that I bring to the table that are my strengths, that I do better than other people at the restaurant, and help me bring those to the top. Help me utilize those and leverage those so that I feel like I'm contributing here and I'm part of this team. You guys need me and I'm making contributions. If this generation was in charge of the workplace right now, one thing that I think is different about how Gen Z sees the world around them is they see how information is held in a much different way than some of the older generations. If you're an older generation, like let's say the baby boomers, when you kind of came of age, it was all about like the org chart, the top-down chain of command, that the expert or the boss is at the top of the chain and they pass information top down. That's how we learn. That's how information is shared and it's how it's held. This was how we used to teach in the classroom. Teacher was at the front of the room. They'd write on the chalkboard or the dry erase board. You would silently sit there, copy down your notes. That's how information was passed along. Those days are over. And for Gen Z, it's all about the network. Information is everywhere. Good ideas come from everywhere. It's not always the expert boss teacher at the front of the room that's going to have all the good ideas and all the answers. And my entire life as a Gen Z young adult, my entire life, I have been rewarded and encouraged to use technology and to find new ways to do old, outdated things, to be that person that finds a better process for how we do this. So if I come into your organization and I've got new ideas about how we can change things or we can do things differently, I'm not trying to be disrespectful. I'm not trying to be insubordinate. I'm trying to be reflective of my entire life so far, where I've been listened to and I've been asked what I think and I've been giving my opinion and I've been challenging the paradigm. So when I come in and I challenge the paradigm in your restaurant, are you open to being challenged? Or are you going to feel like I'm being a disrespectful, insubordinate Gen Z? I'm trying to be helpful. I'm trying to contribute my ideas. And I've always known a world where it's all about the network, not necessarily that top-down org chart. So how can you help me connect to your network? How can you introduce me to new people so that I feel like I'm expanding my network and I'm kind of thriving here in your organization or in your restaurant? If you want to reach Gen Z, where are they? Well, no surprises here. They're on social media. We've already talked about how TikTok has taken over the world. TikTok is the center of the Gen Z universe. Part of why it's so appealing to Gen Z is it's kind of content created by the user. It doesn't kind of have that corporate commercial feel to it. So we talk about things like influencers. We'll talk about them in a minute, because it's kind of user-generated, authentic content that's real. It doesn't feel manufactured by a corporate client or a corporate audience or a commercial. that these are real people creating that content and it seems genuine and authentic. Obviously, if you have a child at home, you know that gaming and their online presence is incredibly important. The amount of time that they spend on games and social media would probably make the rest of our heads spin. And here's a survey that they just did of Gen Z that kind of made me take pause. They asked them whether your in-person persona or whether your online presence is more important. And a majority of Gen Z said that my online presence, how I present myself to people online, is more important than how I present myself to them in person. And a lot of the older generations might shake their head at that. I would think Gen Z would point to the recent pandemic when we stopped being able to meet in person and their online personas and presence thrive. So if you ask Gen Z what's more important, I think they'll tell you that what I do online, how I present myself online, might be more important than how I do it in person. And I'll often get asked, how is Gen Z different from a millennial? So here's some things to think about. Whereas the millennials grew up with technology and we might have had a phone by the time we left our parents' house, we weren't the smartphone kids. We didn't grow up with that smartphone in our pocket that gives us access to anything we're wondering about or anything we want to learn how to do. We can find it immediately. We don't have to wait, immediate gratification without waiting. They're the generation who grew up with social media influencers. So a lot of Gen Zs will look to their peers or to some of the influencers that they follow to take their advice or to get their opinion over what we might have qualified in the past as the true expert, the person who's risen to the top of their field. That might not be the person that Gen Zs care about listening to. They know how heavily marketed we are too, that everybody's marketing trying to sell something to us. They're cynical and skeptical. These are the kids who were raised by Gen Xers. They saw a financial crisis. They saw a lot of political partisanship where the adults are always screaming and yelling at each other and arguing and fighting. They're used to that turbulent world. They're used to getting their news in real time. And if everybody's connected online and we're all connected through our social platforms, then who can you trust? They might be more skeptical to trust the traditional experts and shun them in favor of one of their peers who they feel like is giving them the straight information or the real answer. They're heavily influenced by this social media culture where they're influenced by people that they follow, those influencers. And if you want to know the equivalent of television for the rest of us, for Gen Z, it's TikTok. TikTok is Gen Z TV. And I might be the expert just because I have a lot of followers. And a lot of older generations will look at some of these social media influencers and say, how on earth do they have 2 million followers? What do they do that's so special that everybody wants to pay attention to what they're doing? And even as a millennial, I'll admit that sometimes I question this too. To me, the millennial, I can kind of remember before social media took over. So we idolized people like Michael Jordan or LeBron James or those like sports stars that were the more traditional kinds of celebrity. But now there's a new kind of celebrity. And Gen Z finds these people and it gives them relevant, authentic commentary on things that are important to them. So I'll talk to my basketball boys and I'll say, how on earth do you guys spend hours and hours watching other people play video games and just talk over the top of it? Like, how is that interesting to you? That seems like the most boring thing in the world to me. And my point guard on my basketball team basically just shut me down and said, Coach, this guy is the best in the world at this game that we're all obsessed with. And if you were able to follow and see the best in the world, that's something that you were really interested in, wouldn't you do it? And I was like speechless. He like totally kind of put me in my place. And it's so true. It's not relevant to me. I don't care about it necessarily, but that doesn't mean that millions of kids from this other generation do. So this is where they get their relevant information. They can follow people that are following things that are important to them. And for Gen X, the reality that they've always known is that they've come of age in an economy where there are now hiring signs in every single window you look at. Jobs are everywhere. And a lot of young people have this attitude of, I don't need your job. My grandpa did. Grandpa needed a good job and he was lucky to have it and he acted like it when he got it. But now I don't need this job. Not only can I go work in a million different places in whatever town I live in, I travel the country speaking about this stuff, One of my favorite games is to count the number of now hiring signs in the window of the town I'm driving into. Everybody's hiring. Gen Z knows it. I can quit this job. I can go find another one this afternoon. And on top of that, maybe I don't even need to conform to the traditional workplace. This is the sharing economy. So maybe I'll Uber and drive a car at night and make money. Maybe I'll Airbnb my apartment and go crash on my friend's couch. One of my best friends did that. He would Airbnb his apartment a few times a month. When that happened, he would sleep over at a friend's house, and he made enough money to pay his rent, bills, and grocery bill just from Airbnb his apartment. We don't necessarily need your job, and that's dangerous to the workplace because Gen Z, they quit a boss. They don't quit a job. So what can we do? The $1 million question, what can we do to build culture and win over those mentors? I think that before we talk about what you need to do to build culture and win over the mentors, it needs to start with the mentors on your staff. Before we can talk about what Gen Z wants to be successful, we need to talk about how do we engage the mentors. The mentors are the ones that create the culture of teaching and learning and sharing that make me as the Gen Z employee feel like I'm learning here, I'm thriving, they care about me, they look after me. This is a good place for me. Maybe not for the rest of my life, but I'm happy here right now, and I need to take care of this job because I don't want to lose it. A lot of those skeptical mentors out there are maybe saying something to this effect. So if I just help them and mentor them and cater to them, aren't I just one more person that enables them and reinforces those negative stereotypes? Because if you ask somebody like my grandpa, for my grandpa, life was hard. And he looks at kids today and he says, kids today have it easy. So you want me to be a mentor to this younger generation of spoiled, entitled people? Some of their weaknesses, and this is not my opinion, this is what I've heard on my travels around the country, that a lot of Gen Z employees these days, they're aloof about responsibility of the working world. They're unrealistic about the expectations of the workplace. They're not as committed as I was when I was 25 years old. And as soon as something isn't fair to them, they are so quick to be the victim and let you know about how they were slighted or what the injustice was or what was unfair. And if you want to win over those mentors, a lot of them might say, well, why should I help them? What's in it for me? I keep my cards close to the chest. It took me a long time to learn how to be good at this job. You want me to just teach them all of the secrets? It took me so long to learn. When I feel like that they don't even really work as hard as I did, they need to go figure it out on their own. And a lot of people have that skeptical attitude. And you probably have people working at your restaurant that hold these views. And we've got to get to them. We've got to get to them first and tell them that we have a problem right now. We have a labor shortage problem and we need you. We need your help. Your experience matters. You need to share what you know and you need to tell your story. I might be the Gen Z employee who strolls into your restaurant and starts telling you what you need to do differently, and I share all these great ideas. But that doesn't mean that I don't realize that you built our reputation, that you built this restaurant, this business into what it is today, and that we owe that to you. But that doesn't mean that I'm still not going to walk through the door with ideas that I have to improve the way we do things. And if you really want to know how to attract tomorrow's talent from Gen Z, it's in the title of our session this morning. You do it by attracting talent through the leadership you already have on your team. It's the leaders on your team that attract tomorrow's talent. It's the people that I say, I really like her. I like working for her. She's a really cool manager. She knows that I've got stuff going on outside of this restaurant that I care about more than just waiting tables. But she helps me. She helps me see the bigger picture. She's patient. She teaches me what I need to know. That leadership is what will attract tomorrow's talent. And if we break down the stereotypes and we win the mentors over, then hopefully we're in a place where we can talk about what Gen Z actually wants. So how do you knock down these stereotypes? Millennials and Gen Z, the young professionals around us, they need too much feedback. They ask too many questions. And then when they mess up, you can't even criticize them because they're so sensitive these days, you can't tell them what they need to hear. I think that that's because there used to be this old rule in the workplace that no news is good news. If I'm your manager and you haven't heard from me, you can assume everything's going fine. No news means good news. I'm not going to come around the restaurant once a day and find you and think of some random compliment to blow some smoke up your rear end so you feel good about yourself. That's just not how we used to do things back in the day. But now things have changed. I need to hear from you. No news is good news. That's bad news to me if I'm Gen Z. I've always had a constant dialogue from my parents, from my teachers, from my coaches, and I'm going to expect that not to change when I enter the workplace. So give me the constant dialogue and the feedback that I crave, because it's worth your time and patience. Feedback is the key to being able to criticize me. The more feedback you give me, the more of a rapport we build up, the more I'm going to trust you as a manager and a supervisor. And the trust that I have in you is going to foster loyalty to this job. If I respect you and I trust you, I'm going to be more loyal to the job you gave me. And trust ultimately will enable criticism. The millennials, the Gen Z employees, the ones that you can't criticize are usually the ones you haven't invested time into first to build up a relationship. If you only come around when I make mistakes, or you only come around and talk to me when there's a problem to be fixed, I'm going to think that I'm not good at this job, that you don't like me as a manager, and maybe I'll resent you a little bit and think you didn't teach me what I need to know to be successful. You didn't give me that toolkit. I don't have trust in you. I don't respect you. I'm definitely not going to sit here and let you berate me or criticize me. But if you've put in that time and you've paid your dues and we've built up a rapport in a relationship and there is a mutual respect, you can criticize me as much as you need to. You can tell me what I need to hear. So how do you build my trust? Be authentic. Show me that you were vulnerable once upon a time, that you were the new person that didn't have all the answers. If you can, work alongside me. Show me what I need to know. And remember, common sense, those things that are just common sense, but if I haven't had the same life experience as you, and I'm the Gen Z, and anytime anything was dangerous or difficult or dirty or really hard, an adult usually swooped in and did it for me because they were trying to protect me from dangerous, difficult, dirty things. That probably means that I don't have the same level of common sense that you do at the same age. What is common sense? Common sense are those things that somebody shows you once and you never need to see it again, or you should just know intuitively. But that comes from life experience. That comes from doing things. So remember that I might not bring the same level of common sense to the table that you did. You might need to take more time and patience to teach me, to show me, to bring me along, to get my level of common sense up to where yours is. So show me how to do that. And now once we finally knock down the stereotypes, we've talked about winning over those mentors, coaches, leaders. Now we can really quickly kind of talk about how do we manage Gen Z at work. So here's 4 things I want you to think about when it comes to managing your Gen Z staff: their life stage, their learning style, and some ideas and tips on how to retain them and incentivize them to stick around. Life stage. So if you are Gen Z and you are, let's just say, 25 years old, I can guarantee you that you are at a different life stage than my baby boomer parents. That means you make your decisions much differently when it comes to what you do for your work and your lifestyle. And depending on the life stage I'm at, if I'm still single, if I'm still lifestyle driven, if I'm still that Gen Z typical employee, I might look at your job as my work family. Have you heard that term before, work family? A lot of Gen Xers, it makes their stomach turn. Work family, I've got a real family that drives me nuts. I work my tail off at work. I go home to them. That's my second job, my family. I don't have time for a work family, okay? So I'm not telling you, the advice here is to not go back to the restaurant, walk up to a Gen Z and say, hi, I'm your new work dad, okay? I'm not telling you you have to go be somebody's work parent. But what I am telling you is that this is a tremendous opportunity. You don't have to do this. You don't have to do any of the things that we've been talking about this morning if you don't want to. This is America, right? But I'm giving you an opportunity. This is an idea that depending on my life stage, if I'm still single and lifestyle driven, I might be looking to the relationships that I have at your restaurant and the coworkers that I interact with. Those emotional connections might mean more to me than you realize. And that's an opportunity to cultivate those emotional connections and help me feel like I'm really thriving in this job. You can help me thrive by giving me access to new people that I can meet, build my network, to new information and opportunities, to new trainings. Maybe you send me somewhere where I learn things about the kitchen that I'm going to be working in. Maybe I get to go to a convention where we're learning about new things we can do at the restaurant, or we're going to redo the menu and you want my input about new ways, new ideas, new trends that are popular, that things that people are going to want when they come in, new anything it can possibly be. Those are things that make me feel like I'm thriving. To get more specific on helping me thrive, more frequent milestones, because I have a much shorter time horizon if I'm Gen Z. I'm not married with 3 kids. My parents at 25, they knew they weren't going anywhere for the next 30 years. They had 3 kids under the age of 8 at home. But that's not my life stage if I'm Gen Z. So you need to make milestones with recognition and different things that I'm being kind of acknowledged for in a much shorter time horizon more frequently, so that I feel like I'm doing good at this job, I'm being recognized for it, and I belong here. They want me here because they value me and they show it. Gen Z learning style. Learning used to be very passive. We mentioned it at the beginning. Passive learning used to be the teacher writes on the chalkboard, you silently sit there, you write it in your notebook, and that's how you learn information. Passed down from the top to the bottom. Not anymore. Even since the millennials like me have left the classroom, classroom teaching has flipped and it is now completely interactive. I need to be involved. I need to be holding it and touching it and feeling it. We're tactile learners if we're Gen Z. We're visual learners. Don't just hand me a company handbook and expect that I'm going to read through it. It's not going to happen. It needs to be interactive learning, taking into account the fact that we all have shorter attention spans. We blame kids today. Oh, they have such a short attention span. Oh yeah, because the rest of us are doing so good on that front right now. We're all multitasking. I bet you half the people on this call have been sending texts and checking email while hopefully also listening to Steve Bench here on the virtual session. So take into account my attention span. Offer me choices to learn and get my information through the ways that I already do, through my phone, through YouTube. Connect with me on the channels that I'm already using. Offer me choice within your organization at the restaurant. Empower me to be in control of the process. We all know why micromanaging is bad. The opposite of that is allowing me to make as many decisions in the process as I possibly can, because that's going to empower me, make me feel like I'm in control, and I'm kind of in control of the outcomes of the work that I'm doing. When you're able to give me as much transparency and context and significance, this is why the policy is this at work. Don't just tell me that this is the rule. Give me transparency, give me significance, and you explain to me why we do it this way, then I'm much more likely to get on board and understand. If you want to retain me, remember, my grandpa was lucky to have this job, but those days are over because jobs are everywhere now and everybody's fighting for that next great employee. So we need to flip it around. And this isn't just how we need to treat Gen Z. This is how we should treat all of our employees. We know you can go work anywhere. You're choosing to work for us. We are lucky to have you here. And we feel like that about all of our employees. We're lucky that you're committed to us. And we're going to show you that we feel that way. We're going to be ready for you on your first day. We're not going to be like, oh, we'll find you a work shirt eventually. That happened to me once. It was like, everybody was really nice, but it was like, did you guys even know I was starting today? Because it feels like an afterthought. And if you treat me like an afterthought, I'm going to treat your job like an afterthought. So show me that you need me, show me you're ready for me, and show me that I have a future here in this organization. Be open to my new ideas, be open to being challenged, and remember, you can do everything perfectly. You could do everything we just talked about in this session. You're still going to lose Gen Z employees because they're at a life stage where they're able to just change jobs so frequently. So it's inevitable. It's going to happen. Don't get frustrated. Don't get mad. Just get feedback. What happened? Why did he or she leave? What can we maybe do differently so that that doesn't happen next time? And then also understand sometimes we're just going to lose good people. We can't let it get us down. We got to keep chugging along. And as we wind it down here now, I'll leave you with two final thoughts. If you want to incentivize me, remember that as a Gen Z employee, I am much more now focused than my parents who were future focused. Future focused is when you got 3 kids at home under 8 and you know that they're all going to need to go to school at some point and spend a lot of, you're future focused. But I'm the Gen Z employee. I'm thinking about tonight. I'm thinking about this weekend. I'm thinking about what I'm going to do this summer. So how can you incentivize me with milestones and recognition and work benefits that take into account I'm thinking about now, not 2, 3, 4 years from now. I'm thinking about now. And my parting thoughts as we say goodbye today, you have to absolutely start by showing me how this job can fit around my lifestyle. Then you need to show me that we don't expect you to know all of the things you're going to need to know to be successful in this job. You're not supposed to. That's okay. We're going to teach you what you need to know. We're going to give you a toolkit that you're successful in this job. And if you screw up, that's okay. We're going to talk about it. We're going to fix it and it'll be fine. Now, internally, if you screw up a couple times, we might have to have a different conversation, right? Make sure the mentors know that. We don't just get free passes and extra credit to stay on the job as long as we want to. But eventually we'll have a different conversation. But for right now, you're not supposed to know how to do this. We're going to teach you. And if you screw up, that's fine. We screw up every single day. We'll talk about it. We'll fix it. We'll show you how this job can fit into your lifestyle. Because I might be the millennial or the Gen Z employee who cares more about our lifestyle than our career. But that doesn't mean that I can't get a small part of my identity through what I do for work. I'm just going to need your help to get there. And remember, you're going to deal with difficult Gen Z employees. It's inevitable. Don't let it get you down. Remember this rule of thumb. In any group of people, Gen Z especially, there's about a third of us who already get it, we're successful. There's a third of us that can be taught, and there's a third of us that are just a lost cause. So forget about the Biebers of the world, forget about Michael Phelps. What are you doing to focus your energy and passion on the 1/3 of those Gen Z generation, the 85 million that want to learn, that want to do it the right way? Can be done. I'm just going to need your help to get there. Thank you guys so much for listening this morning. My name is Steve Bench. I had a great time talking with you. And if anybody would like a copy of these slides, all you got to do is reach out to me at stevebench.com and say hello. Find me on LinkedIn. Otherwise, I'll definitely share the slides with Amy as well, and you can get the slides through her. I've also got tons of reference articles that I use to put this presentation together. I'm more than happy to share those as well. But otherwise, I'd love to hear from you guys at stevebench.com. And at this point, I'll turn it back over to Amy and let her take it from here. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you so much, Steve. We're going to say goodbye to our Facebook Live audience. And if anybody, I know there's a couple comments, if anybody has any questions quickly, feel free to put those either in the Q&A or the chat box, if there's any questions. And there is a question about the recording, and yes, anybody that pre-registered for this session, I will go ahead and send you the full recorded link in the next day or two, so you will get that. And for those of you that may or may not be aware, we do have a bi-monthly e-newsletter on workforce-related issues. So if you want to shoot me an email, I'll get you on the list if you aren't getting it already. And I sure appreciate you being here, Steve. I'll give everybody a moment here if there's any other questions. Here's a question. We're planning to switch our handbook to an interactive format. Do you have any platform suggestions?
So what I would actually do is I would sit your staff down, and I would, doesn't mean you, like, just like with kids, doesn't mean we need to do what their suggestions they come up with. I would sit them down and ask them. I would say, what would you be most comfortable with using, and allow them to take some kind of leadership in putting it into practice. One, they're going to give you really good ideas. Two, they're probably going to be interested in helping to do a lot of the work for you, right? I mean, one of my best pieces of advice is task them with a project that they're already going to be kind of good at, right? If you came to me and said, you know, we've kind of got this outdated way we do this, we need the new young experts to give it a 2021 makeover, they'll probably jump at the opportunity, because I mean, that's some of the most impactful ways that they can make a difference in your restaurant or your organization, to say, we were the team that kind of came up with this new process. So I would ask them, I would say, if I can't access it through my phone and if it's not posted to social, those are kind of two things where you're going to lose me. You know, we've all got now 2 minutes while we're waiting for our takeout food, or we're waiting for our Uber to show up, and I got 5 minutes, the equivalency of what used to be sitting at the bus stop, right? So when I've got that 5 minutes of downtime, that's when I want to watch a video. That's when I want to learn. So how can we put it online, make it accessible for us to use around my busy lifestyle so that I can get that information when I need it? And I would say, in terms of specifically what to use, ask those employees. They'll have better answers than I could give you.
Thank you, Steve. Well, it is just after the hour, so we're going to wrap up here. Thank you again, Steve, so much for taking the time to be with us today. Thank you, Gordon Food Service, for your continued support. The next workforce-related webinar will be on August 23rd, also at 9 a.m. And we have with us Matt Martin with the Marcus Corporation talking about recruitment. So thank you again. And if you have any questions, just shoot me an email, and get in touch with Steve if you'd like those slides. And everybody have a good rest of your day.
Bye,
Take
everybody.
care. Bye-bye.